Chapter 18. The words of Carson Price hung in Victor's mind and filled him with anger, frustration, and panic. Trust me. He had known exactly what would happen in the match. His kind words, his delicious food, and his promises to help Victor find Jennifer had all been a ruse to get more sacrifices for himself. Victor remembered Carson's counsel about the consequences of interference, of attempting to escape, or of attempting to help someone else escape. Now that Victor saw Jennifer standing nervously on the other side of the arena, he could see why the demon worshipper emphasized these points. He whirled around toward his sponsor in fury. To his surprise, Carson Price spoke up. "Angelica," said Carson with a smile, "I thought you wanted to find out who was most fit." Angelica's dark eyes flashed with anger. "Of course I do, Carson," she said. "That's the point of the tournament." "Pitting these two against one another does not accomplish this," said Carson with a laugh. There were gasps of shock all around. Most notably, there were gasps of shock from Victor and Jennifer, who did not think that a demon worshipper would come to their aid. "My asset is clearly superior," said Carson, "and when he wins, I will be in a situation where I would be required to sacrifice her." "You say that as though it's a bad thing," said Angelica in a confused tone. The crowd was silent as they waited to see what Carson would say in response. "It might be difficult for you to understand," said Carson as though he were choosing his words carefully. Angelica clenched her fists angrily. "But the men in the crowd can see the value she has." There were murmurs of agreement throughout the audience. Jennifer folded her arms in front of her body in discomfort. Victor cracked his knuckles in frustration. Angelica's expression softened. "I should have known, Carson," she said with a smirk. "You males can be so simple. What do you propose?" "I propose that we double the stakes," said Carson excitedly. The crowd roared in approval, even though he had not yet explained his plan. After a moment they quieted down. "You let these two become my assets and cooperate as a team. You may use your other asset and my large guard, whose strength you have already seen." The crowd cheered again. "So if they survive, she becomes available to you as an asset," said Angelica. "And if they do not, I sacrifice them both." "Do we have an agreement?" shouted Carson excitedly. Angelica smiled widely. "Yes," she exclaimed. The crowd roared their approval as Angelica went with one of Carson's guards to choose her new asset. Victor's mouth hung open in disbelief. A demon worshipper had just negotiated on his behalf. He had no idea what to do. Fortunately, Jennifer had the sense to rush up to Victor. "Victor," she said with a smile. "Jennifer," he said as he snapped back into reality. "I thought you might have died," she said in a worried tone. "I was worried about you too," said Victor. "Are any of the others with you?" asked Jennifer. Victor shook his head. "No," he answered. "What about with you?" "No," she replied, "except for Row 82, and I only just barely found out about him. I don't know what we're gonna do." "I guess we have to survive this before we can do anything to help them," said Victor as he looked at the ground. They began looking at the racks of weapons to see what they had available to them. As they looked, the hulking guard in the mask bounded out toward the far side of the arena. "That's not good," said Jennifer. Victor said nothing, but he agreed with Jennifer's assessment. On the other side of the arena came the other woman in a red cloak, with a large black key dangling from a chain about her neck. "A fire demon worshipper, right?" asked Victor. Jennifer shrugged. "I guess so," she said. "The contestants will be positioned at opposite ends," shouted the announcer. Jennifer and Victor came to one side. The masked man and the hooded fire demon worshipper went to the other. The fire demon worshipper spoke briefly to the guard, but Victor and Jennifer had no idea what she was saying. "Just stay close, Jennifer," said Victor. Jennifer nodded. The official blew a whistle and their opponents began rushing toward them. The massive man grabbed a rack of weapons and hurled it toward them. Axes, knives, and spears flew through the air toward them. Victor grabbed Jennifer's hand and pulled her to one side. He skidded to a stop as a giant fireball erupted in his path. The large man continued barreling toward them. He reminded Jennifer of a gorilla at a circus charging toward the cage bars, only there was nothing to protect them from this beast of a man. Victor backed up and picked up a big knife that the large man had thrown, then pulled Jennifer behind him. "Be careful, Victor," whispered Jennifer. He turned and gave her a confident smile. As he turned back to his opponent, his brave facade melted away, and a look of dread came to his face. The hulking man leapt up into the air. Victor tried to pull Jennifer to the side, but a fireball erupted in his path. He desperately shoved Jennifer back, then pointed his knife blade upward toward the falling behemoth. "Victor!" screamed Jennifer. The massive masked warrior landed on top of Victor with a crash. The crunch of bones could be heard even at the edges of the audience, and the crowd cheered loudly as the large man groaned and struggled to get up. The official rushed over to see if Victor was close to death. "He got him!" shouted Angelica with glee. She rushed down near the official to see when she could begin slaughtering him as her sacrifice. Jennifer did not wait for the whistle to scoop up a javelin and throw it into the large man's back. Tears began to well up in her eyes, which further obscured the sight of the red-cloaked fire demon acolyte moving into a position to attack her. The crowd cheered as fireballs came flying toward her. She charged toward the large man as he struggled to get up and took cover under him as fire rained all around. The masked man had been hurt by Victor's attack and by the fire from his partner, but he realized that Jennifer was now in range and reached out for her. She screamed and struggled, but he gripped her leg tighter and laughed sadistically. He began pulling her close so that he could strangle her with his massive hands. Jennifer looked down at her key, but realized that slowing time would do little. She considered jumping to a different time, especially after seeing Victor getting crushed by this monster. She thought perhaps if she went back, she might be able to save him. Of course, nothing in her experience led her to believe that she could actually change the past, but she was desperate not to lose Victor. As the massive man pressed his large hand against Jennifer's face, denying her air, she reached for her key. Before she could reach it, the hand suddenly stopped pressing against her and slid off of her face. To her surprise, Victor Lee stood with glowing eyes slashing into the massive masked man. The guard's arm had been cut off, and before long Victor had removed the guard's other arm with his blade. A huge feeling of relief swept over her as she realized that Heaven's breath had repaired the injuries that he had sustained. The crowd was jumping up and down with excitement as Victor kicked the massive guard back away from Jennifer. Angelica stared with her jaw hanging open for a moment as Victor continued to attack the humongous masked man. She had not anticipated this. Of course, she did have something else in mind. The fire demon worshipper had come closer and was preparing to launch more attacks. Jennifer turned slightly to notice Angelica Sterling's greedy smile. She had undoubtedly believed that she could win by using the masked man as a tank while her acolyte roasted them. It was not a bad strategy, but Angelica had not seen the full extent of Jennifer's power. Now that Victor was healed, Jennifer furrowed her brow and grabbed her glowing divine key. "I will not be too late," she said in a low voice. Everything seemed to slow to a crawl. Jennifer rushed toward the stack of weapons and grabbed a spear. As time had paused, so too had the roar of the audience, but she could perceive a gasp of surprise from a short woman in a small black cloak. She knew immediately that Leslie Fisher had discovered her secret, much in the same way that Felix Light had when she fought to protect Lizard. Of course, it did not matter to her right then. It only mattered that she stopped the fire demon worshipper that was raising her hands to launch fiery bolts at Victor Lee. In a moment, Jennifer used the spear to pull the chain with the black key up and off of the head of their enemy. In a smooth motion, she spun around and flung it beyond the fence. Ensuring that she did not use too much power herself, she allowed time to resume its normal flow and began striking the demon worshipper with the spear. The crowd gasped as Jennifer jammed the blunt end of the spear into the gut of the acolyte, forcing her down. She grabbed the spear like a bat and swung it against her head, knocking her out. Victor finally shoved the masked man down and turned to see Jennifer standing next to him. There was a loud whistle from the official. "It's over," shouted the announcer. "I never would have guessed this result, but these two have proven themselves to be a great team. It will be interesting to see how things work out in the coming rounds." Victor tried to look away as Carson stepped into the light and began gleefully sacrificing the enemies they had defeated. Jennifer seemed to understand the dynamic of the crowd and waved to them. This seemed to bring the male spectators to their feet. Victor noticed the disgusted look on Angelica's face. Though he still did not trust Carson Price, he had to admit that there was a degree of satisfaction he felt in denying her victory. She had come in with an extra asset, and while she had not been eliminated, her advantage had been lost. Jennifer and Victor went to the empty section from where Victor had stood on the low row of seats to the sound of applause. They had made it past the first round. There were 5 surviving fighters. Management had his short control acolyte, the Death Witch had the bald woman, Angelica had row 82, and Carson had Jennifer and Victor. With 5 individuals, one of them would get a bye in the next round. Victor immediately hoped that Jennifer would get the bye, but he also knew that it was important to avoid another Carson-Angelica match, since that would require one of them fighting row 82. Row 82 gave them a look of shock that made Victor feel uncomfortable. He pointed toward the matchup board on the other side of the arena. The next matchups had been determined. Jason Torres would put his surviving asset up against Jennifer, who was now sponsored by Carson Price. Victor thought of the disgusting control acolyte manipulating Jennifer's body and grew angry. "You'll have to be fast and just take him out," whispered Victor to Jennifer. She looked up at the board and nodded in acknowledgement. "It won't be a problem," she said confidently. After another moment she gasped. "What?" asked Victor. "The other matchup," she said. The Death Witch's bald apprentice had received the bye. Though Carson Price had helped him this round, it was unlikely he could do anything to manipulate circumstances further. He and row 82 were set to fight. The tournament rules that Carson had stressed to Victor came back to mind. If he refused to fight, he would die. If he attempted to escape, he would die. If he attempted to help his opponent escape, they would both die. If he were to fight, he would be killing his ally. His train of thought was interrupted by the sound of the announcer. "We've just received word," shouted the announcer. "The matches in the second round will be played in reverse order. Carson Price's asset will face Angelica Sterling's asset immediately." Jennifer gave him a worried look. Victor tried to put on a confident face, but he felt a bit of despair creep into his heart as he stepped back toward the arena opposite row 82.